Don't ever open your door at night, because the last woman who did lost her child before morning. No scream, no struggle, just gone. And the thing that took him was already inside her house. Ngozi thought she understood loss. Her husband had left one morning and never came back. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. And from that day, she told herself one thing: nothing would ever take from her again. Not her peace, not her home, and definitely not her son. But what she didn't know was this: some things don't take by force. They wait, they watch, and when the moment is right, they knock. That was why, on the night everything changed, the storm unsettled her long before the knocking began. It started before sunset. The sky darkened too quickly, as if evening had been pushed forward by impatient hands. Wind moved low through the village, not in a playful sweep, but in cold bursts that lifted dust and tugged at wrappers drying on lines. Birds disappeared early. Goats became restless. Even the cooking fires seemed reluctant, their flames bending and snapping as though the air itself wanted them gone. By the time night came, the rain had begun. At first, it was only a scatter against the roof, then a steady drumming, then a hard, relentless pounding that swallowed every other sound. Water streamed from thatch and gathered in rivulets outside the compounds. The paths turned dark and slick. Thunder rolled so heavily it seemed to come from the ground instead of the sky. Ngozi secured the shutters, moved the water pot away from the wall where the roof sometimes leaked, and pulled Chinedu close when a bright flash of lightning made him jump. "Will it break the roof?" he asked. "No," she said, though she was not fully sure. "It is only making noise." He leaned into her side, watching the doorway as if storms could take shape and enter like people. She smoothed his hair and told him one of the short stories he liked, the kind with clever tortoises and foolish kings, and little by little his body relaxed. But hers did not. Something about the rain felt wrong. Not stronger than other storms, not stranger in any obvious way, but heavier, as if it carried intention. She was still listening to it when the knock came. One strike, hard enough to cut through rain. Ngozi froze. Chinedu looked up at her at once. "Who is that?" She did not answer. She was listening for a second knock, hoping perhaps she had imagined the first. The house seemed to hold its breath with her. Then it came again. Not hurried, not weak. 3 slow knocks, the kind a person gives when they know someone is inside and are willing to wait. A small chill moved over her skin. No one in the village visited during storms unless there was an emergency. And emergency knocks did not sound like that. Emergency knocks were quick, frightened, desperate. This knock was calm, controlled, patient. Another flash of lightning whitened the room for a second. In that instant, she saw Chinedu's face clearly, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "Mom," he whispered, "don't." If she had been anyone else, perhaps she would have listened. But Ngozi had spent too many years believing that refusing help was a kind of cruelty. What if someone was stranded? What if someone had been injured? What if a traveler had missed the footpath and found the village by luck? The storm outside was the kind that stripped pride from people. Even a strong man might beg for shelter in weather like that. The knock came again. 5 slow beats this time, not angry, certain. Ngozi rose to her feet. Every instinct told her to stay where she was. Yet another voice, older and stronger in her, argued back. Kindness does not close the door on a storm. Kindness does not pretend not to hear. She moved toward the entrance. Behind her, Chinedu said her name softly. It was not a cry. It was something sadder, the voice of a child who already sensed he would not be obeyed. Ngozi lifted the wooden latch and pulled the door inward. A man stood there under the rain. He was tall, though not enormously so, thin in the way of people who have walked long roads. His clothes clung to him with water. His shoulders were slightly bent, but whether from cold or from habit she could not tell. Rain ran down his face in thin lines, and for a moment she thought perhaps he was younger than he first appeared. Then he raised his head fully, and she saw his eyes. They were not wild, not pleading, not relieved, just empty, not blind, not dead. Empty in a way that made her think of a room after all the furniture has been taken out, a place meant for something human, but hollow. "I have nowhere to go," he said. His voice was low and smooth, almost difficult to hear beneath the rain. It carried no urgency. It did not tremble from cold. It was simply there. "Please," he added after a moment, "let me stay until morning." Ngozi should have asked where he came from. She should have asked why he had been on the path in weather like this. She should have asked who he belonged to, whose son, whose brother, whose husband. In villages like theirs, strangers were not impossible, but they were rarely unconnected. There was usually some thread that tied a new face to someone's memory. But standing there, with the storm behind him and her son watching from the mat, she asked none of those things. She stepped aside. "Come in." The man dipped his head once and entered. The smell that came with him was not the smell of ordinary rain. It was wetter than that, colder, with something underneath it that reminded her of leaves left too long in shadow. He paused just inside the doorway while she shut it and dropped the latch back into place. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Chinedu shifted closer to his mother. "This is my son," Ngozi said. The man looked at the boy. Something unreadable moved through his face, a faint as a shadow crossing water. "Good evening," he said. Chinedu did not answer. Ngozi told herself children could be rude when frightened. She found a dry cloth and handed it to the stranger. He accepted it, but barely used it, only patting his face once before letting the cloth rest in his hands. She warmed leftover soup and offered it to him. He thanked her, lifted the bowl, and drank slowly. His movements were careful, almost studied, as if he had spent a long time watching people eat before remembering how to do it himself. "Where are you coming from?" Ngozi asked. He looked at the bowl for too long before answering. "Far." It was not really an answer. "And where are you going?" "Away from where I was." Again, not an answer. Ngozi felt a small tightening in her chest. She glanced at Chinedu, who was pretending not to stare and failing completely. The stranger seemed not to notice. Or perhaps he noticed everything and simply chose which things to acknowledge. When he finished, he set the bowl down with care. "You are kind," he said. Something in the way he spoke made the words feel less like gratitude and more like observation, like he had identified a fact about her and placed it somewhere useful. Ngozi spread an extra mat near the hearth and told him he could sleep there until the rain eased by morning. He thanked her again and lowered himself onto it. Chinedu stayed pressed against her side until she lay down, and even then he did not fully relax. Long after she closed her eyes, sleep refused to come. The room felt changed. Not visibly, the walls were the same. The roof still creaked under wind. The water pot still sat where she had moved it, and yet the house no longer felt like hers. It felt watched from the inside. At some point, the stranger's breathing became deep and steady, or at least it sounded that way. Ngozi turned carefully and saw his form still on the mat. She told herself she was being foolish. Storms could make any house feel unfamiliar. Grief could make any woman suspicious. The village warnings about strangers at night were probably exaggerations grown from old fear. People made stories around danger because stories were easier to remember than instructions. Beside her, Chinedu stirred in sleep and reached for her hand. She gave it to him. Eventually, sometime deep into the night, she drifted. Then she woke. Not fully at first, just enough to know something had disturbed the thin edge of sleep. The rain had weakened. Thunder had moved farther away. The silence between sounds felt stretched. And then she heard it. A footstep. Soft. Dragging. Inside the house. Her eyes opened. The room was dark except for the dull glow of embers. For one disoriented second, she thought she must have dreamt it. Then another step came. Slow. Careful. Near the doorway. Ngozi lifted her head slightly. The stranger was not on the mat. Her heartbeat kicked so hard she felt it in her throat. Another step. She could not see him clearly, only the suggestion of shape in darkness. Tall, still between movements, facing them. She tightened her fingers around Chinedu's hand. The shape remained there for so long she began to wonder whether it had ever moved at all. Then, with a slowness that made her skin prickle, it turned away. A few seconds later, she heard the faint rustle of the stranger lowering himself back onto the mat. By the time dawn arrived, she had convinced herself not that nothing had happened, but that she had no proof of what had. The stranger was sitting quietly when she rose, as though he had been awake for hours. "You did not sleep well," he said. It was not a question. Ngozi studied him. In daylight, his face seemed more ordinary. Tired, perhaps. The kind of tired that flattens expression. The emptiness in his eyes was less obvious, though not gone. "The storm was loud," she replied. He inclined his head. "Storms wake what should remain sleeping." The words landed strangely between them. Before she could decide whether to ask what he meant, Chinedu spoke from behind her. "Mom, I want to go with Auntie Ifeoma today." Ngozi turned. Mahi rarely asked to leave home early unless he was upset. "Why?" He looked not at her but at the stranger. "I just want to." The stranger smiled. It was a small smile, barely lifting the mouth, but it changed his face in the wrong way. It did not add warmth. It removed something human. Ngozi felt it again, that tightening in her chest. Yet when morning expanded and the village resumed its ordinary sounds, the strangeness of the night began to feel less solid. Women passed carrying basins. Men shouted to one another across compounds. A baby cried somewhere nearby. Smoke rose from kitchens. The world was behaving as though nothing unusual had happened, and there is a powerful temptation in human beings to trust the world's performance over their own unease. She told the stranger the roads would likely be passable by afternoon. He nodded. "I will leave before evening." That should have relieved her. Instead, it frightened her more, because she realized suddenly that she had not once seen him ask for directions, not once seen him look beyond their compound with the interest of someone planning where to go next. It was as though his journey had ended the moment her door opened. Chinedu stayed close to her all morning. He did not play in the yard. He did not run to greet neighbors. He even refused roasted corn when a woman selling food passed by, and Chinedu had never refused roasted corn in his life. When Ngozi bent to wash bowls, he bent with her. When she crossed to fetch water, he followed. Finally, she crouched so their faces were level. "What is wrong?" she asked gently. He hesitated. Then he whispered, "He keeps looking at me." Ngozi forced calm into her expression. You are imagining too much." But the words felt weak the moment they left her mouth, because she had seen it too. The stranger watched Chinedu the way some people watch a road they intend to take at first light. That afternoon, while Ngozi pounded pepper in the mortar outside, she realized the house had gone too quiet. It was the kind of quiet mothers hear before anyone else. Small but wrong. She set the pestle down. "Chinedu?" No answer. He had been inside moments ago. She was sure of it. She wiped her hands and stepped into the room. The mat was empty. The doorway curtain to the back was still, the water pot untouched, and the stranger's mat empty. For a second, her mind refused to understand what her eyes were seeing. It is one of Mercy's crueler habits that it often delays comprehension by a heartbeat or two. Enough time to let hope whisper, perhaps they are just outside, perhaps you are overreacting, perhaps— "Chinedu?" she called again, sharper. No answer. She checked behind the house. Nothing. She crossed to the yard. Nothing. Then she began to run. She called his name down the path, into neighbors' compounds, toward the grove where children played. People emerged at once at the sound in her voice. Women abandoned bowls and babies. Men came from under shelters and trees. Questions rose all around her, but she was already beyond answering. "He is gone," she said. "My son is gone." "And the stranger?" someone asked. That was when she stopped moving, because in all her searching she had not yet allowed herself to form the thought completely. "The stranger is gone too," she said. A murmur passed through the gathered people. Not loud, not dramatic. Worse than that, recognizing— An old woman near the back raised a shaking hand to her mouth. A man who almost never showed fear looked suddenly unwilling to meet Ngozi's eyes. Ifeoma, her nearest neighbor, took one step backward as though distance alone might protect her. "Who did you let into your house?" someone whispered. The question broke whatever control Ngozi had left. She screamed for them to stop staring and help her search, and to their credit, they did. Men combed the paths beyond the village. Boys were sent to the stream. Women checked yam barns, empty shelters, every place a frightened child might hide. Even the forest edge was searched, though no one liked crossing that line after storms. Nothing. No footprints clear enough to trust. No dropped cloth, no broken branch, no voice calling back. Only absence. When dusk began to lower itself over the village again, the search slowed. Not because people no longer cared, but because fear was beginning to shape their choices. The rain had washed away signs. The light was thinning, and deep in many of them lived the same old warning that had lived there all their lives. Never open your door to a stranger at night. Ngozi refused to stop. She searched until her legs trembled and her throat felt torn raw. She searched until men older than she was had to catch her when she stumbled. She searched until darkness made the forest edge look like one long, open mouth. At last, when they physically led her back toward the compound, she understood a terrible thing. Everyone else was hoping to find Chinedu. She was beginning to fear she would find the truth instead. That night, the village did not sleep. Or rather, they slept in the way frightened people do, close to waking, listening for anything that might confirm their dread. Some gathered in small groups and muttered prayers. Others sat behind barred doors and pretended bravery for the sake of children. Ngozi sat in the middle of her room, staring at the space where the stranger's mat had been. Every moment replayed itself. The knock, the empty eyes, the calm voice, the smile. The house still smelled faintly of rain and something colder underneath it. Near midnight, a shadow crossed her doorway. Ngozi rose so quickly her knees nearly gave out. It was Mama Nena, one of the oldest women in the village, bent with age but sharp in ways age could not dull. She entered without waiting to be invited, closed the door behind her, and stood looking at Ngozi for a long time. "You know something," Ngozi said. The old woman's face tightened. "There are stories," she replied. "I do not want stories," Ngozi snapped. "I want my son." Mama Nena nodded once. "Sometimes the stories are the only road to what was taken." Ngozi said nothing. The old woman moved closer and lowered herself slowly onto the mat. "There are things that travel in storms," she said. "Things that do not enter by force. Things that need permission. They wear what we can bear to look at. A traveler, a beggar, a lost man. They ask for little, shelter, warmth, water, and if they are invited in—" She paused. "They do not leave empty-handed." Ngozi felt all the air leave her lungs at once. "You knew this," she whispered. "We know warnings," Mama Nena corrected quietly. "Not always the full truth." "Then tell me the full truth now." The old woman's eyes held hers. "If it is what I fear, then the stranger did not come because of the storm. He came because of you." Ngozi stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means grief has a smell, loneliness has a shape, love has a doorway. Some things can find those places." She looked toward the dark doorway. "And mothers are easiest to bait." Ngozi's voice dropped. "Is my son alive?" Mama Nena did not answer quickly. "That depends," she said at last, "on how far he has already been taken." Ngozi wanted to scream, but the sound stayed trapped behind her teeth. "What do I do?" The old woman leaned closer. "You wait until the darkest part of the night is nearly broken. Then you go to the silk cotton tree beyond the old stream. If the stories are true, that is where what wears a man's shape stops pretending to be one." Her voice lowered further. "If your son is there, you must not cry before you reach him. You must not call his name until you see his eyes turn to yours. And no matter what speaks from the dark, you must not answer unless it speaks with his mouth." Ngozi swallowed hard. "And if it is not him?" "Then you run," Mama Nena said, "and pray your feet remember the way home." Ngozi did not wait for dawn. She tied her wrapper tighter, wrapped a cloth around her shoulders against the cold, and took the small lantern from its hook. Mama Nena pressed something into her palm before she left, a string threaded with tiny seeds and old brass. "For memory," the old woman said, "so you remember who you are if he tries to confuse you." Ngozi nodded, though she barely understood. Outside, the village lay under that tense silence that follows fear. Clouds still moved overhead, but the rain had thinned to a wet mist. The path beyond the compounds shone dark in the weak lantern light. She walked quickly at first, then faster. The stream lay beyond the cassava fields, and beyond that the path narrowed into the older part of the forest, where fewer people went now than in years past. Trees stood closer there. Roots rose from the ground like sleeping snakes. The air smelled of wet bark and deep earth. More than once she thought she heard something moving parallel to her in the darkness. More than once she nearly spoke Chinedu's name. Each time she bit it back. At last she saw the silk cotton tree. It stood broader than the others, pale bark slick with rain, roots thick and coiling into the earth like the fingers of something too large to bury. Even from a distance it seemed separate from the rest of the forest, not by space, but by feeling. The darkness around it looked denser. Ngozi lowered the lantern flame with trembling fingers. Then she saw them. At first only shapes, one standing, one seated at the ground. Her heart slammed so hard she had to grip the lantern with both hands. The standing shape turned slowly. The stranger. Only now the shape he wore looked less complete. The edges of him seemed uncertain, as if the darkness around him was deciding whether to keep holding him together. And on the ground, Chinedu, still, upright. Eyes open, not bound, not crying, just staring ahead as if something had reached into him and turned all the light down. Ngozi almost called his name then. The urge rose like a scream, but Mama Nena's warning held her mouth closed. The stranger smiled. "You came," he said. The voice was the same and not the same. It carried more than one sound inside it now, like water moving under a floor. Ngozi's fingers tightened on the lantern handle. "Let him go. He is not tied." "Then why does he not move?" The stranger glanced down at the boy. "Because he is listening." "To what?" "To the place where I found him." Ngozi took one careful step forward. "Chinedu." The boy's eyes shifted slightly. Not to her. Not yet. Just enough to show he had heard something. The stranger raised a hand. "Do not rush," he said softly. "You might break what is still delicate." Ngozi looked at him fully then, and whatever disguise remained began to fail under her gaze. His skin no longer held the tone of ordinary flesh. It looked too smooth in some places, too loose in others, like a face remembered imperfectly. His eyes had deepened into hollows that held a faint, wrong light. "What are you?" she whispered. He seemed almost pleased by the question. "I am what enters when invited." Ngozi felt cold spread through her limbs. "Why my son?" "Because he is where your heart lives." The creature tilted its head. "And things are easiest taken from the place where love is strongest." Ngozi wanted to hurl the lantern at him, to claw, to bite, to do anything but stand and listen. But Chinedu was there, too close, too still. "What do you want?" The creature's smile widened by a fraction. "You already know." And in that moment, she did. Not shelter, not food, not even the boy, not truly. It had wanted entry. Its permission. A path opened by her own hand. Everything after that had only been collection. Ngozi took another step. This time Chinedu's eyes moved toward her. Only a little, but enough. Enough for a mother to feel hope strike like pain. "My son," she said, barely above a breath. His lips parted. "Mom." The word was weak, far away, but real. The creature turned sharply toward him, and for the first time anger cracked across its borrowed face. Ngozi moved. She dropped the lantern, lunged forward, and seized Chinedu under the arms. He was colder than he should have been, heavier too, as if the ground did not want to release him. Behind her, the creature made a sound that did not belong in any human throat. Roots shifted. Wind slammed through the clearing, the lantern went out. And in the dark, something rushed toward them. The darkness closed in around her so suddenly it felt alive. Ngozi pulled Chinedu toward her with everything she had. "Stand!" she whispered harshly. "Stand, my son!" For a second, nothing happened. Then his body jerked, like something inside him was fighting to return. Behind her, the creature let out a sound that vibrated through the ground. Not anger, not pain, something worse, possession slipping. The wind rose violently, branches above them shook, leaves tore loose and spun through the air. Ngozi could no longer see clearly, only shadows moving where the creature stood, but she felt it. It was coming closer, fast. "Come!" she cried, dragging Chinedu, but his legs refused to move properly. Each step felt like pulling something out of deep water, like something unseen was holding him back. "Mom," he whispered again, this time weaker, the fading. And that was when fear hit her fully, not the fear of losing him, but the fear that she was already too late. The creature stepped forward into what little light remained, and now it was no longer pretending. Its body stretched unnaturally tall, its limbs too long, its face shifting, changing, never settling into one shape, eyes glowing, watching, hungry. "You cannot take him," it said, its voice now layered like many voices speaking through one. "He was already given." Ngozi shook her head violently. "I gave you nothing." The creature tilted its head slowly. "You opened the door." Those words hit her harder than anything else, because they were true. And in that moment, Ngozi understood something terrifying. Not everything that destroys us forces its way in. Some things we invite. Ngozi tightened her grip on Chinedu, her hands shaking, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "Take me instead." The creature paused, just slightly but enough. "You already offered him," it replied. Ngozi shook her head. "No," her voice broke slightly, "but I'm offering you something better." The creature's eyes flickered, curious now, interested. "A mother," she said, "who will follow you willingly." Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, because this was not part of its plan. The creature stepped closer, too close, its presence cold and suffocating. "And why?" it asked slowly. "Would you do that?" Ngozi looked down at her son, at his weak, distant eyes, at the child who had carried her through grief. And softly, she said, "Because he is my life." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature smiled, slowly. "That is why I chose him." And before Ngozi could react, it moved. Everything happened at once. The wind exploded outward. The ground trembled. Darkness surged forward like a wave. Ngozi felt something tear through her chest, not physically, but deeper than that. A pull, violent, unnatural, and suddenly Chinedu fell, not dragged, not thrown, just released. Ngozi gasped, her body collapsing to her knees, and for the first time, Chinedu cried, real tears, warm, alive. "Mom!" he screamed. Ngozi reached for him but couldn't move, because now the creature was holding her, its form wrapped around her like shadow, not touching, but consuming. "This was always the end," it whispered, and for the first time, Ngozi understood. It never wanted the boy, not really. It wanted the door, and what came through it. She looked at Chinedu one last time. His tears falling freely now, his voice breaking, his body shaking, and somehow she smiled. Not out of happiness, but peace, because he was alive. "Run," she whispered, and this time he did. By morning, Ngozi was gone. No footprints, no struggle, no sign. Only Chinedu remained, alive, shaken, changed forever. The villagers gathered. They listened, they whispered, they feared. And from that day, a new warning spread. Stronger than before, clearer than ever. Never open your door at night, no matter who is knocking, no matter how human they sound, no matter how much they beg, because some things don't break in. They wait for you to let them in. Sometimes, the price of one mistake is everything you love. Because not all kindness is safe, and not every cry for help is meant for you to answer. Tell me honestly, if you heard that knock, would you have opened the door or would you have walked away? I want to know your answer in the comments, and if you enjoy powerful African stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Folktales by Kiyomi, because the next story might be even darker.